Hello, I'm Harley Schlanger, the Schiller Institute. Welcome to this week's International Strategic Webcast by Helga zepp-LaRouche, who is the founder and the president of the Schiller Institute, and who is at the forefront of the fight for bringing together a new paradigm to replace the collapsing, dangerous old paradigm of geopolitical confrontation. There have been more developments in the last week that have consolidated the new paradigm following the BRICS summit, a whole series of new initiatives, dialogues opening, dialogues continuing, and of course, hysterical reactions coming from the City of London and the neocons in the United States. Helga, why don't we start with the continuing momentum from the BRICS summit, because there's a lot to report. Why don't you give us an update on what you know about that?
Yes, we had discussed this last week, but in the meantime, it is more reports that have come out that it was not just the BRICS, but you had not just BRICS plus, like many important developing countries participating, but actually you had almost the majority of all important developing country organizations, such as the G77, Mercosur, the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Countries, many regional organizations. And one can really say that what is emerging there is very, very rapidly a completely new economic order, a new system of governance based on win-win cooperation, on respect for the sovereignty of the other one. And this is really carrying on the new Silk Road spirit, which is now capturing the majority of the nations, at least of the Southern Hemisphere and the developing sector. So this is creating completely different conditions, so that many conflicts which seem to be completely unresolvable can now work in a peaceful direction. And I give you just one example with the new head of Pakistan, Imran Khan, who basically said that Pakistan will follow the Chinese model. But he also said that he wants a rapprochement with India, and that for every step India makes in respect to Pakistan, he is willing to do two steps. So, there is actually for the first time the possibility of resolving the India-Pakistan conflict. And, it's also the first time that the Russian military has military maneuvers together with Pakistan. Now, China obviously plays a big role in Pakistan. Russia has very good relations with India. And now, in the new spirit of the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and, the BRICS Global South, how they call this new development, makes it possible to resolve this conflict. And another one, apart from North Korea, which we discussed already, which is contrary to the media lies, on a very good track. It's moving forward in the right way. There is also now, in the new Silk Road spirit, for the first time, a rapprochement between Somalia, Djibouti, Eritrea, and Ethiopia. And in this context, the Houthi leader in Yemen made a unilateral peace offer to the other side, for the sake of the peace of the Yemen people who are suffering the worst humanitarian catastrophe on the planet. There should be a ceasefire and a move towards peace. So I think all of these developments are really absolutely fantastic, and they show that under the leadership of the BRICS, especially naturally China, Russia, and India, and South Africa and Brazil with it, but there is an effort to replace the old collapsed geopolitical order with a new system of international relationships, which I think is very, very promising. And it's too bad that our mainstream media in the West are so gleichgeschaltet, so absolutely controlled, that most people know absolutely nothing about these fantastic developments because the media just don't report it. But that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So therefore, I appeal to you, our viewers, to make sure that this program becomes more known, shared among your friends and acquaintances, and join the Schiller Institute, because we have to get the West to participate in this shaping new world economic order. I think it's absolutely possible, it's doable, and however, it does require a lot of work.
Well, it's somewhat incredible the degree to which these developments are not reported. One example that you've brought up and that the Schiller Institute has been very much involved in promoting is the move to reconstruct the city of Aleppo, which was destroyed largely because of Western support, British, American, Obama support for the terrorists inside Syria. And now there's a whole move to reconstruct that city. This is part of the new paradigm, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, you would think that the West, which especially in Europe has been completely, destabilized and shaken up by the refugee crisis, that they would be among the first ones to report this. But no, they don't. But it is a fact that the governor of Aleppo has basically announced a three-part program. The first one is to rebuild the infrastructure. The second one is to help every single affected family, and thirdly, to bring them safely back in the reconstructed Aleppo. And there is also a Russian refugee center in Syria where refugees return from Jordan, from Lebanon, from Turkey, and are being then brought back into their respective regions. So you would think that this is top news, that the refugee crisis can be solved by rebuilding the country. And, it is just a complete scandal because, all I can say is the story about who is financing and who has created the white helmets and who has, invented the narrative against Syria. This should all come out and will come out, and the criminals should find justice.
Well, another very important example of non-coverage was the meeting between President Trump and Italian Prime Minister Conte. Part of the reason this was so important is that the media played up very big the fight between Trump and the Europeans at the recent NATO summit, the attack that goes on constantly against the Italians in the EU press. And now here you had a conference that seemed to have quite a bit of substance to it, and there's no coverage of that. Are people in Europe aware of the importance of this meeting, and is this getting around to the people you're talking to, Helga?
Well, I think it it found some coverage, but the meeting is really historic because the Trump and Conte formed a new strategic partnership between the United States and Italy, especially to address the crisis in Libya. But also, Trump said that he recognizes the Italian leadership role for the entire Mediterranean, and I think this is very good. They struck an immediate friendship. Naturally, the German media was quite freaked out, and they talked about that the new axis now exists between Washington and Rome against the axis Berlin-Paris. I mean, this is quite ridiculous, but it is one more step to show that the famous European unity does not exist, and it will not exist because the policies of the EU are such that they make enemies out of their own members. So I think this Conte Trump development is very positive.
And part of that is the new government that's come into power in Italy was not only opposed by the EU bureaucracy, but one of the reasons they were being opposed is their support for, at least among some of the Lega party in the coalition government, support for Glass-Steagall. Now, I bring this up because there's a huge fight that's emerging in Europe over what's going to happen with the City of London in Brexit. And you have the derivatives crisis, the City of London threatening Europe that they will not provide backup for derivatives. I mean, this thing is set to explode, isn't it?
Yes, there is very clear panic because the British financial industry is about the only industry they have, and if their demand now is according to unnamed British government officials, but anyway, this is circulating that the British demand, despite the Brexit, to keep control over the European derivative trading. Now, this unnamed government official said, if this is not allowed, then in return, thousands of investment firms will go bankrupt. And, this is not a threat, he says, but just a warning how much both sides would lose if a deal is not struck in our favor. Now, I mean, this is really mafia talk, and it just shows you that the nerves are blank. The fact that Deutsche Bank moved their derivative trading to Frankfurt was commented by a multi-billionaire, I think, Sir Alan Sugar, not so sweet, but that's his name. And he said that that fact that Deutsche Bank moved their derivative trading to Frankfurt is the beginning of the end of the financial, importance of London as a financial headquarter of the world. Now, Jamie Dimon also warned, that the quantitative easing must continue, or else, there could be panic. So I think, despite the fact in some places people pretend it doesn't exist, the danger of a new financial blowout is imminent all the time and could be triggered by anything. So I think we need Glass-Steagall, and I think the Italian media covered very nicely the big banner our colleagues had in the United States in front of the White House. When Conte arrived there, he saw the banner and he waved in recognition because the banner said, Benvenuto, Prime Minister Conte, go for Glass-Steagall, and other such slogans. And this was very nicely covered in the Italian media, who obviously were quite surprised to find such a welcome of their prime minister. So I think this is all very interesting, but it really makes clear how super urgent the four laws of Lyndon-LaRouche are: Glass-Steagall, national banks, credit system, new Bretton Woods. All of this is absolutely urgent, and the only country which is doing something about that is China. You had meetings between Xi Jinping and Li Keqiang, practically with the entire Chinese leadership, warning of potential external shocks, a completely challenging international environment, and therefore the need for China to absolutely focus on the real economy, strengthen the small and micro firms, strengthen R&D and innovation, absolutely curb any kind of speculation, and in that way making the country more secure against such external shocks. So I can only say it would be good if the Western governments would draw a lesson from this, because if you have an uncontrolled collapse, we could be in a terrible chaos in no time.
I mean, it's somewhat ironic that from the West, people like Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan Chase and others are saying the solution is more funny money from the central banks, whereas the Chinese are saying more production, more investment. And that, of course, is the message that you and your husband have been fighting for years. Now, I want to bring up another example of what we were talking about earlier, the kind of potential that exists within the new paradigm, one that's very shocking to most people, which is the potential for an emerging relationship between President Trump and Lopez Obrador, the president-elect of Mexico. Keisha Rogers, who's a LaRouche-endorsed candidate for Congress in Texas, put out a proposal for a North American Belt and Road Initiative. What do you think about that, Helga?
Well, I think this is a brilliant idea because, there was a discussion from the side of President Trump to renegotiate NAFTA. But why would you renegotiate something which was so absolutely detrimental against the interest of every participating country, Canada, the United States, and Mexico? And therefore, she proposed to call for not NAFTA, but NABRI, standing for North American Belt and Road Initiative, and picking up on the proposal by Obrador, President Obrador, inviting the United States to invest in infrastructure projects in Mexico as the best way to solve the migrant problem. Now, this is very good. And Keisha Rogers told me that she is planning a whole bunch of events around that, both in the United States, also involving Mexico. So, since the Schiller Institute has been campaigning for the United States and naturally European countries also, but especially in this case, the United States, to join with the Belt and Road Initiative and have joint investments in South and Central America for infrastructure projects in the tradition of what my husband had worked out with Lopez Portillo more than 30, 35 years ago. Operation Juarez was the plan to have an integrated infrastructure development plan for all of Latin America. And that is now absolutely back on the table. China is having many, many relations with the Latin American countries. And, it's very good that Obrador invited both Xi Jinping and Trump to his inauguration event on the 1st of December. So I think there is obviously absolute recognition that there is no contradiction between the United States and China of working together with the Latin American countries and bring them out of poverty, bring them into a better way of life. And I think that that is the way to go. And you will hear a lot from Keisha Rogers about that in the next month.
And it might be appropriate to make sure that Xi Jinping, President Trump, and Lopez Obrador have copies of Lin's Operation Juarez pamphlet, because that actually shaped the whole fight that was going on in the 1980s around the debt bomb and the move away from a bankrupt system. And instead, what was done in the West was to double down with speculation, deregulation, and so on. Now, Helga, one of the ongoing themes of the move toward a new paradigm was expressed by President Trump after his press conference with Prime Minister Conte, when he brought up this idea that he's prepared to talk to Iran, the idea of dialogue, not war. Isn't this what drives the neocons crazy, that the president, even when he's talking about possibly going to war with Iran, is saying he'd rather talk than fight?
Yeah, they just can't get rid of their old geopolitical manipulation. I mean, one good example of that is Henry Kissinger, who, according to some press accounts, basically advised Trump to work with Russia to contain the rise of China. Now, it's funny because, in 1971, when I was the first time in China, the news was announced that Kissinger would come and visit China. And if I remember correctly, he was then advising the Chinese basically against Russia. So these people, they just cannot think in terms of the higher one mankind, a community of a shared future of humanity, as Xi Jinping always calls it. They can only think in terms of a zero-sum game. They can only think one wins and the other one loses. And the new paradigm, which is coming into being very, very quickly, is win-win. Everybody wins if you respect the interest of the other and vice versa. So I think, the only problem is, I think this new world economic order is marching very quickly. Almost every day you have a breathtaking positive development. The only problem is if we don't manage to get the West, the United States, and European nations on board, they will be sidelined. They will be completely unimportant at the detriment of their own populations. And that is the only thing we should be worried about, and increase our efforts to get them to join the new paradigm.
Well, there was also a new exchange between President Trump and President Kim Jong-un of North Korea, an exchange of letters, Trump thanking Kim. and the possibility that he would come to the United Nations and address the General Assembly. Again, this is something which should be not just big news, but something that people should be wanting. But again, we see the reaction against that. How do you see things shaping up on the US North Korea? There's a lot of continuing backbiting, nasty coverage in the media, but it does appear as though there's some continuing progress.
Yes, Kim Jong-un sent a letter to Trump where he said that he's convinced that epochal changes will come out of their next meeting, to which he is looking forward to. And you mentioned already the tweet of Trump thanking him for the release of the remains of the US soldiers, bringing them back home. So, I mean, all the signs speak really that this is continuously moving forward and that the fake news media are just at it again.
Now, Helga, there was also something that came up, which I think is something that the Schiller Institute would very much support, which was a call to release all 9/11 documents. There's still an enormous amount that's classified. Do you think this is something that would have a powerful effect if it happened?
Oh, absolutely, because obviously the 9/11 story, was a game changer for the United States and in different ways for the rest of the world. So Walter Jones and I think Congressman Blumenthal put out a statement demanding that all the documents having to do with the families of the victims of 9/11 should be declassified. And I think Blumenthal said, look, put yourself in this position. If you were a family member of one of the victims and you would look at the documents and then you come to the part where it says, and the following persons have proved to be guilty for this, and then it's blacked out, blacked out, blacked out. And he said that these family members have the absolute right to know who is responsible for the death of their beloved ones. Now, quite interesting in this context is that an FBI agent who was the one who warned already in July 2001 that there were plans by Saudi Arabia to plan a terrorist attack in the United States, which obviously was not followed up at the time. He said that he was told to do everything in his power to prevent the families of suing Saudi Arabia. And he said that he basically now feels it is his duty to speak out on this. So I think, that and the fact that Congressman Nunez demanded that all the documents related to the FISA warrant around the Steele dossier and the whole, coup against Trump should all be declassified. He said if the American people could read this, they would be shocked. And he promised that despite the recess of the Congress, that his committee would stay in August and work, overtime to have interviews, to have people subpoenaed, investigate them, and absolutely stay at it. So I think, we have not seen this end of it, and the chances, that it could happen. What Trump had, suggested in a tweet 2-3 days ago, that Sessions should just shut down the switch hunt, and that Mueller had basically was so full of conflict of interest that it should be just shut down. This could actually happen, and maybe some criminal prosecution against the guilty ones would follow. So I think we need to, absolutely support this demand that the documents around the 9/11 be declassified, because this is one of the 3 areas which points to the role of Robert Mueller. Not the only case, but one of them, and therefore I think it is extremely important if the United States is supposed to go back to be a full constitutional republic and undo the damage of 9/11 and everything which came with it.
Well, it's not surprising that Mueller was trying to use classification and other means to suppress the emergence of these documents. I saw on YouTube about a 1-minute clip the other day of Mueller testifying before the Congress, endorsing fully the war against Iraq, and saying that there's absolute evidence that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. So he was part of developing the narrative that led to the war, which played a very significant role in Trump's election victory when he attacked George W. Bush for lying to the American people over this. Now, another story that has to come out is the situation around Ukraine. Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, has been involved in some discussions recently about the reality of Ukraine, that it is the government of Ukraine, the Kiev regime, which is blocking any progress. Helga, is there any chance that this is going to come to fruition in the EU, or is this going to continue to be a sticking point between improvement of Western relations with Russia?
Well, what Lavrov actually said is that behind closed doors, many of the Western leaders admit that they absolutely are aware that Kiev is controlled by Nazis, but that they don't have the courage to basically come out and admit it. Now, this is an ongoing thing because you see that not only did the Obama administration, Victoria Nuland, the EU, back this coup in Ukraine, but they're doing exactly the same or trying to do the same thing again in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe had just an election where the ruling party was elected with an overwhelming majority of, I forgot now, I think around 80% or something. And Elmar Brok was there, as Elmar Brok is a European Parliament parliamentarian, pretty much identical with the Bertelsmann Foundation, and he has played a leading role in the Maidan, cheering on the demonstrators and basically steering it on. And he was the only election observer of many organizations in Zimbabwe who found any obstacle. So he basically demanded, that the election results should be published immediately, even if it normally takes 5 days until all the results are there. So he said this is because of mistrust to the electoral college or the electoral board. And this was then the trigger point for the movement for democratic change, basically to call for riots. They started to burn down property, cars, and in the context of this violence, 3 people were killed and many wounded. So there is video footage of these things, so we can expect that there will be some follow-up, because to incite people for violence and then have people killed for sure is a crime which will be found, which will find appropriate response. But you can really see the EU is not only blocking the collaboration with China in Africa or other matters, other areas, but they continue their policy of regime change, of destabilization, and they should just be denounced, and this should stop.
Well, Helga, we've covered a lot. Is there anything else that we've missed that you want to bring up?
No, I just want to really come back to where we started, that there is so much reason for hope. I mean, if you have now a peace process involving India, Pakistan, the Koreas, the Horn of Africa, and you have an absolute commitment for overcoming underdevelopment and poverty in the developing countries. Now, this is just a reason for joy, and I think it is really the reality of the future, and not the hysteria which is created by many forces in the West. Germany, for example, is a sad example. They are using this heat wave, which naturally is causing terrible damage for the farmers and in general. But they're using that to go completely overboard, say, we now need to absolutely go out of coal altogether to reduce the CO2. And we should have a commission on traffic to discuss how to reduce traffic. I mean, all of Africa will soon have nuclear plants, and they are perfectly manageable. Putin at the BRICS summit said that Russia will help to light up Africa and give electricity to the 600 million people in Africa who still don't have it. and focus especially not only on gas and oil, but especially on nuclear energy, where Russia is in the meantime the world technological leader. And many other developing countries are going in the same direction of building nuclear plants, which are absolutely manageable by humanity. And if countries like Germany remain in their super greeny fit, it is terrible. It will collapse. And since I love my country, and I'm not only a world citizen, but I'm also a patriot, I really think we have to change ways and go back to the old values we used to have in Germany, which were humanist values, which were a belief that Germany is a country of poets, thinkers, and inventors. And so I'm not giving up hope, but we need a change. And I always said probably Germany is going to be the last country, but if it's surrounded by countries which all want to be part of the Belt and Road, which is increasingly happening in Europe, eventually we will crack even that country. So I think I'm optimistic. It's a challenging situation. The world is extremely complex, but the vector of development is positive. So join the Schiller Institute and help us to continue this work until we have the world in safe waters altogether.
And I think if people want to have the same optimism that Helga does, you have to not only catch the new Silk Road spirit, but spread it. Make sure people tune in every week to this webcast. Help us build the audience and build the membership of the Schiller Institute. And Helga, sitting here in Germany with you in this heat wave, I can attest to the fact that we need more nuclear plants in Germany so we can have some more air conditioning here. So until next week, thanks again, Helga.
Bye-bye.